Hey everyone, welcome to CalicoRadio Knits. I'm Taryn. Today's video is a knitting tutorial for a pattern that I recently released called the Portland Raglan Dog Sweater. You can find a free downloadable version of the written pattern on Ravelry and on my website. I'll include links to both locations in this video's description box. The pattern includes instructions for how to measure your dog, needle sizes, gauge swatches, and all that stuff. So if you want to check out the written pattern first, you can decide which size you're going to make, and then we can go ahead and start with knitting this sweater. Okay, let's get going. The supplies you're going to need to make this sweater include a DK weight or light worsted weight yarn, a tape measure, some scissors, a little bit of scrap yarn, some stitch markers, a tapestry needle, and some circular needles. All of the information for cable lengths and needle sizes can be found in the written pattern. To cast on our neck ribbing, we're going to be using our smaller cable needles. I have recommendations for cable lengths depending on what size you're making in the written pattern, which you can check out. I'm going to be knitting a size small for mech today, so I'm going to be using 23 centimeter cable length needles or 9 inches. And the actual size of the needles is 4 millimeters or a US 6. So as far as cast on method goes, it really doesn't matter too much because you're not going to see the actual cast on row because we're creating a folded neckband and the cast on edge is going to sit on the inside of the sweater. So I recommend using the long tail cast on method because it's going to make it easier to create that folded neckband. I am going to be casting on 56 stitches for the size small, and this number will vary depending on what size you're working. So we're going to leave a nice long tail here today. To start, I'm going to use a slip knot, and to do this, I'm going to wrap the yarn around my finger twice like this. I'm going to pull that back loop over the front one, and then again that back loop over the front one like this. And now we have our slip knot. This is my tail, and this is my working yarn. I'm going to insert my needle like this and tighten it up a little bit. To begin casting on, I'm going to hold my yarn in 2 hands. There is nicer, prettier ways to do this with 1 hand, but I prefer to use 2 hands for the long tail cast on. Again, this is my tail, this is my working yarn, and I'm going to take my tail and essentially do like a backwards loop cast on like this, but don't let go of it. Wrap your working yarn around your needle and then flip that loop over and tighten up. And now we have 2 stitches on our needle. And again, do kind of a backward loop onto the needle, wrap your working yarn, flip that loop over the needle and tighten up. And now I have 3 stitches on my needle. And I'm going to keep doing that until I have 56 stitches. All right, and I now have my 56 stitches on my needle. We're now ready to join in the round and work our 1x1 ribbing. So to do that, we're going to have our working yarn on the right side here, like this. And the first thing I want to do is I want to double check that our cast on edge isn't twisted at all. If it is twisted, then it's going to create a twist in the neckband. So we want to make sure everything is nice and straight when we go to join. I'm going to add a stitch marker in this bright color, so I know this is the beginning of the round stitch marker, to the right needle. In this first stitch right here, I'm going to knit, wrap your yarn, and then knit 1. So now everything is joined in the round just like that. And since we're working in 1x1 ribbing, we're going to alternate knit 1, purl 1 all the way around until we reach that beginning of the round marker. So because we started with a knit, we're going to follow it up with a purl, bring the yarn to the front, insert our needle like so, wrap our yarn to purl, and that is our first purl one. And now we're going to keep doing that, knit one, purl one all the way around. So again, knit, yarn to the front to purl, and I will see you guys at the end of the round. And purl that last stitch like this. So that is our first round of 1x1 ribbing. I'm gonna slip that stitch marker, the beginning of the round stitch marker, over to the right side. So I'm gonna keep working in 1x1 ribbing, starting with a knit stitch and ending with a purl stitch for each round until my work measures 11 centimeters or 4.25 inches. This is what I have listed for the size small, and I do have other recommendations for the total length of the neck ribbing, depending on which size you're working, but you can always work more or less, whatever you see fit. So I'm just gonna keep working in 1x1 ribbing until my work measures 11 centimeters, and then I will see you guys back here once I've finished that section. So this is what your ribbing should look like at this point. We're now ready to create our folded neckband. So to do that, I'm going to fold my work inward and line up the cast on edge with the live stitches. So to make sure that your neck ribbing isn't twisted, you're going to want to use your yarn tail as a guide to line up your cast on edge with your live stitches. To create our folded neckband, we're going to pick up a stitch in our cast on edge and knit that stitch with one stitch in our live round to essentially join everything together and create that folded neckband. So to get started, we're going to use our tail as a point of reference to pick up that first stitch. So if you look here on the outside, our first stitch is a knit stitch, but when we go to the inside, we're essentially looking at the wrong side of the work because our work is folded. So you're actually looking for a purl stitch. So this knit stitch on the inside is a purl stitch. So we're looking for the corresponding purl stitch in the cast on row. The tail makes it pretty easy to find it. It's going to be this purl stitch right here. So again, you see that's the first purl stitch. Pick up one leg of that stitch. And you can see we've got the cast on purl stitch here with the knit stitch here. And we're just going to knit those two stitches together to create our folded neckband. So insert your needle through both of those stitches like so. Knit those two stitches together, and we've joined the live stitches with the cast on stitches together to create a folded neckband. You can now see our next stitch is a purl stitch, so we're looking for that next knit stitch. This is the purl stitch we joined. So you can see we have that those are knit stitches. So we're going to go in and pick up one leg of that knit stitch like this, and then knit those two stitches together like so. So we've got a knit stitch here. We're going to look for the corresponding purl stitch, which is right here. So I'm going to pick that stitch up, knit those two stitches together. I will see you guys at the end of the round. I have two stitches left to join with the cast on edge. And before I do that, you can see I have this little hole left. I'm going to take that tail and tuck it inside the neck ribbing. Doing this will make it so I don't have to weave in any ends. I've got one last knit stitch. It's a bit harder to see, but you can kind of follow along with the work you've been doing so far. So this was the last stitch you picked up. We're just going to go and pick up that next leg and knit those two together. And then the last one is always a bit tough, especially with the tail. You see this is a purl stitch here, turn it all the way around. You're still technically looking at the right side because this is the side facing outward. The two wrong sides are facing each other on the inside of the neck ribbing. So we've got a purl stitch here, a purl stitch here, and this is going to be the last leg to be picked up and knit together. And that is the neck ribbing joined together. And we're now ready to work the body of our sweater. To do that, we're going to switch to our bigger needles. I'm going to be using these 4.5mm needles, but again, use the needles that get gauge for the pattern. These are 4.5. I'm going to be using these 40cm long cables. I do recommend for the small using 30cm long cables, but I don't have any free at the moment, so I'm going to make do and use these 40cm long cable needles. So we're just going to now switch over to our larger needles. I'm just going to manually slide over each stitch onto those larger needles like this. So the stitches are now on those larger needles. I'm going to add that beginning of the round marker back. And for the first round of the chest yoke, we're going to just knit all the way around. And that is our first round of our chest. We're now ready to add stitch markers to our sweater to demarcate the raglan stitches and where we're going to work our increases to create our dog sweater yoke. So I recommend having 4 stitch markers that are a similar color and then 4 more that are a different color. And ideally they are a different color than your beginning of the round marker. It's not a huge deal if you don't have these, but it just makes it a little bit easier because we're going to be working our raglan increases at different rates. This setup round varies slightly depending on what size you're making, but all of the sizes initially we're going to count 1 stitch and then place a marker. And then we have 1 stitch, which is our raglan stitch. And we're going to place a marker here. For all sizes, we're going to count 4 stitches. And we're going to place another blue stitch marker. And then we have our 1 raglan stitch here. I'm going to place a 4th marker. Now, this is where the stitch count varies depending on the size, and you can just check the written pattern to see how many stitches you should count here. But for the size small, we're going to count 42 stitches. So we have 2, 4, 40, 42. Okay, we're going to place a marker here. And then here's our 1 raglan stitch. We're going to place the marker here. Count 4 stitches, 2, 4. Place our 3rd stitch marker. Count 1 last stitch, which is our raglan stitch. Place our marker. And then we have 1 last stitch on our needle. And we just lost our beginning of the round marker. Okay, so we've now set up our work to begin working our raglan increases. I'm setting it this way just so you have a good sense of the sweater. And I added blue stitch markers because these demarcate the stitches that will eventually make up our sleeves. So when we're increasing and we see blue stitch markers or whatever color you've chosen, you'll know that that is the sleeve section. And then these kind of black or gold stitch markers demarcate the outer and the inner stitches, which this is the back section, and these 2 stitches are the belly section. So the yoke is worked in a 4-round repeat. So for round 1, we're initially going to knit 1, and then we're going to reach our first marker, and before we slip that, we're going to make 1 right. So to do that, you're going to find this bar in between the 2 stitches right here. And for make 1 rights, you're going to insert your left needle from back to front through that bar, just like this. Now we're going to knit into this front loop right here. Insert your needle like this. So your work should look like this. And then we're going to knit it. And you've just worked a make one right. So now we're going to slip that first marker. We're going to knit that raglan stitch, slip that second marker, and now we're going to increase again through this bar right here, except now we're going to work a make one left. So to make a make one left, you're going to insert your left needle from front to back this time and pick up that stitch. Now to knit that stitch, we're going to insert a needle through that back loop like this. Should look just like this, and then knit it like that. And you've now worked a make one left. Okay, so we're going to continue following that pattern, knit to the next stitch marker. And again, we're going to make a make one right. If you're making an increase to the right of a stitch marker, it's going to be a make one right. And if you're making an increase to the left of a stitch marker, you're going to make one left. So again, we're going to make one right by going, make one right is back to front. And then you're going to knit just like this. Slip that marker, knit that raglan stitch, slip that marker, and then again we're going to make one left through that bar right there. So we're going to go front to back, insert your needle, and knit. And now we're going to knit all of these back stitches until we get to the next stitch marker. All right, so we've now reached that stitch marker, and before we slip it, we're going to make one right into that bar as we have been. So we're going to go back to front, pick up a loop, knit it like this, slip that marker, knit that raglan stitch, slip the second marker, and then again we're going to make one left into this bar here by inserting our needle and then knitting it through the back loop, just like this. Knit to the next marker. We've now reached the next stitch marker. We're going to make one right again, insert our needle from back to front, knit, slip a marker, knit that raglan stitch, slip that last marker, and make one left by inserting our left needle from front to back. Knit, and then knit that last stitch, and we've now finished our first round and have increased by 8. So for the second round, we're just going to knit all the way around, just slip the markers, no increases, just a standard knit one round. And now we finished round 2. So now for round 3, we're only going to work increases for the sleeves, and this is why I use these blue stitch markers. It's a very subtle thing, it's not necessary, but for me it just makes it a little bit easier to remember on round 3 we only increase for the sleeves. So I will show you what that looks like now. So for round 3, we're going to knit to the first stitch marker. We're going to slip that stitch marker. We're not going to work an increase. We're going to work that first raglan stitch, slip the second marker, and now we're going to work a make one left for the sleeve here. So we're going to go front to back, and then knit. And now we're going to knit until the next stitch marker. And now we're going to work another increase here. We're going to work a make one right, back to front, slip the marker, knit the raglan stitch, slip the next marker, and now we're again not going to work an increase for the back section, and we're just going to knit until the next stitch marker. All right, so I've reached the next stitch marker, and as you can see, it's not a blue stitch marker, so we're not going to work an increase here. We're going to just slip that marker. We're going to knit the raglan stitch. We're going to slip that next marker, and we're going to work a make one left here for the sleeve. So we're going to insert our needle front to back, knit, and then knit to the next stitch marker. And now we're going to work a make one right. So we're going to insert our needle back to front, knit, slip the marker, knit the raglan stitch, slip that last marker, and then knit until the end of the round. And that is your third round. Okay, and for round 4, we're going to knit all the way around. And that is the end of round 4. So I'm going to keep working this 4-round repeat for a total of 6 times, meaning I've worked this 4-round repeat once and I need to work it 5 more times for the size small. Depending on what size you're working, you're going to repeat it a different amount of times. You can see the final totals in the written pattern depending on what size you're working. Once I've finished working this 4-round repeat 6 times, I will have 128 stitches for the size small, and I have all the totals for the other sizes in the written pattern as well. So I will see you guys once I've finished the yoke. And I've now finished my yoke, and I'm now ready to move on to the body. And just like a human raglan sweater, we have to separate for the sleeves. We need to put the sleeves to rest and start working just the body portion of the sweater. I'm going to use this scrap yarn and a tapestry needle to put the sleeves to rest, and then we're going to cast on a couple stitches where the sleeves are, and then just work in straight stockinette for the body portion, just the same as you would for a regular human raglan sweater. Okay, so to do that, we're going to slip the beginning of the round marker. We're going to knit to our first marker. And we can remove this marker now because we finished working our increases. We're going to knit that raglan stitch. The raglan stitches will remain part of the body. And then we can remove that second stitch marker. And now these stitches are our sleeve. So I'm going to take some scrap yarn. And I'm going to put those stitches to rest on this scrap yarn. And those stitches are now put to rest. And now before we continue knitting, we're going to cast on a couple of stitches here. Now, using the backwards loop method, we're going to cast on 4 stitches. So I'm going to wrap my yarn just like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we're gonna continue knitting. You can remove that 3rd stitch marker. We're gonna knit that 2nd raglan stitch. Remove the stitch marker. We're gonna continue knitting until we reach that next marker. All right, and we've reached that next marker, which you can go ahead and remove that. We're gonna knit that 1 raglan stitch and remove the next marker, and we're going to put these sleeve stitches to rest just as we did for this other sleeve here. And again, we're going to cast on 4 stitches with the backward loop method. So just wrap the yarn like this, place it on your needle. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can go ahead and remove that stitch marker. I'm gonna knit that raglan stitch, remove the marker, and then knit until the end of the round. And now you should start to see the yoke forming. This is always my favorite part, when you split for the sleeves and you can start to see what the sweater is actually going to look like. And before I move on to the body section, I usually just like to tie the yarn here just so it doesn't come out. It's also nice to do this if you're going to try it on your dog, so they can slip their paws through without any of these stitches getting dropped. Before I start knitting my body, I am going to add a harness hole in the back section here. This is optional, but if your dog tends to wear harnesses, I do prefer to add a hole here because it's hard to get the leash hooked into the harness otherwise. So I am going to add a harness hole here, and to do that, we're going to take one stitch marker, and depending on what size you're working, again, it's going to vary, but for the size small, I'm going to count 38 stitches and place the marker. So this is the beginning of the round, and I'm going to count 2, 4, 6, 38. And I'm going to place that stitch marker right here. So to create that harness hole, we're going to knit until one stitch before that stitch marker that we just placed. Okay, we've now reached that one stitch before the stitch marker. And in this stitch, we're going to work a knit front and back, or a KFB. And to do that, we're going to initially knit the stitch normally, like this. But instead of dropping that stitch from the left needle and moving it to the right, we're going to kind of flip our needles around, bring the right needle to the back, and then knit that same stitch through the back loop. So we're going to insert the needle like this. This is what your work should look like. And then knit through the back loop, and you can now drop that stitch from your left needle. And all this does is it creates one extra stitch, but we are going to get rid of that stitch once we bind off. So you can remove that stitch marker. And we're now going to bind off 4 stitches, and we're going to start our bind off by using that extra stitch we just created right here. So we're going to knit 1, and then bind off that stitch. So it's going to be a little bit tight to work that initial bind off, but that's intentional because we created that KFB to start our bind off to prevent any gaping between our knitted stitches and our bind off. It's just a little technique. If you don't like this technique, you can definitely just bind off 4 stitches normally, but I like to do that KFB before starting a bind off mid work because it prevents gaping. Okay, so we bound off 1 stitch and we need to do 3 more. So we're gonna bind off a 2nd stitch, bind off a 3rd stitch, bind off a 4th stitch. So because we created a stitch, we essentially need to decrease by 1 on the other side. So to do this, I'm gonna move this last bind off stitch over to my left needle like this, just slide it over. And we're going to work a knit 2 together here. And this does the exact same thing as the KFB did on this side of the bind off. By knitting 2 together, it again prevents any kind of gaping. We're going to knit 2 together by inserting our right needle into those 2 stitches right there, knitting them together, and that's it. And now we're going to knit until the end of the round. I've now reached the end of the round. And you can see what working the KFB on this side did and the knit 2 together on this side. So it just kind of creates a bit of a cleaner bind off. Now to close that harness hole, we're going to knit until those 4 stitches we bound off. Now I've reached that gap where we bound off 4 stitches, and I'm now going to cast on 4 stitches using the backward loop method. So got 1, 2, 3, And I'm now going to knit until the end of the round. Okay, I've finished working the harness hole. So now for the midsection, I'm going to work in straight stockinette for about 10 centimeters. You can work this midsection for as long or as short as you prefer. I do recommend leaving about 3 centimeters or 1 inch because we're going to add some final ribbing just to tighten up the back along your dog's belly. Okay, I have now finished the midsection of my sweater. I ended up working 15 centimeters instead of 10. I tried this on Mac a couple times and somehow it seems like he might have gotten longer since the last time I made this sweater. Now we're ready to work the back section, which is going to be worked flat rather than in rounds. So we're now going to work in rows, meaning that we're going to work back and forth like this. And we're going to work back and forth using short rows to slowly extend the back of the sweater, meaning it's going to grow essentially like this to create that back panel to cover the bum of your dog. Okay, so to do that, I am going to use 2 stitch markers. So for the size small, I'm going to count 13 stitches on either side of the beginning of the round marker. 13. I'm going to place the stitch marker and then go to the other side and count 13 stitches again. 12, 13. Okay. This is initially just going to help me know where to start working my short rows. To get started, we're going to knit until we reach this stitch marker, until we have 13 stitches left in the row. So we're going to just start knitting normally. Slip that first marker and continue on until I reach that second marker. I've now reached that second stitch marker and I can go ahead and remove it. Now, instead of continuing and working the end of the round, as I said, we're going to now work in rows. So we're going to now turn our work and we're going to start working on the wrong side. So you should see only purl bumps here. Now we're going to start working short rows and I'm going to use the German short row method. So to do that, as you can see, now we have this purl on our left needle. We're going to slip that stitch purlwise like this. And I'm going to take the working yarn here, wrap it around the right needle, pull it tight. So you can see now it's created a double stitch. That working yarn is wrapped all the way around. Since we're on the wrong side row, we're now going to continue purling until we reach that pink stitch marker that we place 13 stitches after the beginning of the round marker. Okay, now we've reached that stitch marker and we can go ahead and remove it. So now we're going to continue working in rows and we're going to turn our work the same way we did with the previous row, like this, and now we're working on the right side row. And now we're going to go ahead and create a double stitch in the same way we did previously. Bring the yarn to the front, slip that stitch purlwise, and then take the working yarn and wrap it all the way around, and then give it a nice little pull, and then it's going to create that double stitch, which you can see right here. Now that we're on the right side row, we're going to knit instead of purl, so you can keep that working yarn to the back. Now we're going to knit until that double stitch that we created in the last row. So I'm going to knit now. I'm going to keep it nice and tight to keep that double stitch in place. And then we're just going to keep knitting until we reach right before the double stitch, but don't knit the double stitch. Okay, we've now reached our double stitch, which you can see right here. The first couple might be kind of hard to see, but you can tell because it has this different looking front where you did the wrap and turn. So instead of like this nice clean V the knits usually have, it has this kind of tail where you wrapped it. Okay, so we're not going to work this double stitch. We're going to turn our work and then create another double stitch, slipping that stitch purlwise and then wrapping the yarn, pulling it tight. Now we have 2 double stitches stacked on top of each other. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and purl to the double stitch from the previous row. And we're now reaching that double stitch, which you can see right here. And this one is a little bit easier to tell because it doesn't have that nice clean purl bump. So once we've reached that double stitch, we're not going to work it, we're just going to turn our work, and we're going to continue working back and forth in the same fashion. This is technically a 2-row repeat because we work once the right side row and then back along the wrong side row. So I'm going to work this 2-round repeat, right side and then wrong side, 12 more times. Okay, just a quick check-in. This is what your work should look like when you're about halfway through working your short rows. As you can see, like the German short rows are coming up here. It's allowing us to extend the back of the sweater while keeping the belly section open for our dogs. Okay, I'll continue on and I'll check in once I've finished with all of my German short rows. Okay, I'm now finishing up my last row of German short rows here. And I'm going to just turn my work one last time and create that final double stitch. You want to finish with the wrong side row here. And that is it. Let me just show you guys what it should look like. So you can see it kind of creates this open back panel. The belly ribbing will go here, and then this should reach kind of the back of your dog's bum. Okay, now that we've created that last double stitch, you should have a series of double stitches along either side, which is what I have here. It's a little bit hard to see maybe, but these are all double stitches. And then I have, for the size small, I'm gonna have 26 regular stitches in between my double stitches. Now we're ready to create the final ribbing that's going to tie everything together. I'm going to remove the beginning of the round marker that we previously had, and our new beginning of the round is going to be right after that last double stitch we worked. So I've placed the beginning of the round marker because we are now going to again work in the round. Just like our neck ribbing, we're going to work in 1x1 rib. And for the size small, I'm going to work 7 rounds. Start with a knit, followed by a purl, and then just knit, purl, all the way around that first round. So these stitches are easy to work. They're standard stitches, but I'll show you what it looks like once I reach the double stitches. I have now reached all of my double stitches here. And because they're counted as one stitch, we're going to work them as one stitch. So we finished with a purl here. So now for this first double stitch, we're going to knit it. So to do that, we're going to insert our needle through both legs of that double stitch, just like this. And we're going to knit it as one stitch. And now it looks like a standard stitch again. So for the next one, we're going to purl it. So we'll bring the yarn to the front, insert our needle through both legs, just like this, and then purl that double stitch. And then again, we're going to knit this double stitch like this. And then purl. Make sure you grab both legs so one doesn't fall. All right, and we're just going to keep working in that pattern, knit one, purl one, until we reach the end of the round. And now we have knit or purl all of our double stitches, so all of the stitches now should just be standard regular stitches. And now we're going to keep working in 1x1 ribbing for 6 more rounds for the size small. Okay, and I'm just finishing up with my 7th row now. So I finished the ribbing for the back section, and we're now ready to bind off our stitches and be done with the main body of our sweater. So you can use a standard bind off, but it might be a bit tough to get it over your dog's head. So I recommend using a stretchier bind off. I link to 2 popular stretchy bind off methods in the written pattern. One is Very Pink Knits Simple Stretchy Bind Off method, and the second is Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off, which is the one I'm going to use here today. So to start Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off, we're going to use a reverse yarn over. So a standard yarn over would be like this. We're going to use a reverse yarn over, which is like this, from back to front. Now we're going to knit the first stitch, bind off using that yarn over we just created. So we're going to bind off 1. So now, because we have a purl stitch, which you can see right here, we're going to use a standard yarn over like this. And we're going to wrap it all the way around because we're going to need to purl that stitch. So you're going to purl. And now we're going to bind off 2 stitches. So we're going to bind off the first one and then bind off the second one. Okay. Now, because we have a knit stitch, we're going to use that reverse yarn over. So again, instead of yarning over like this, we're going to yarn over in reverse like this. We're going to knit 1 and then bind off 2 stitches like we did last time. So 1, 2. Okay, so we're just going to keep following that pattern all the way around until we reach the end of the round. So I'm going to keep going with the yarn over because it's a purl, purl that stitch, and then bind off 2 stitches. Like that. All right, I'll see you guys at the end of the round. All right, I'm just reaching that last stitch now. All right, and we have our last stitch here, and I'll just flip over this last loop one last time, pull out the tail, just cut that working yarn, and then yeah, we're good to go. We will just weave in this end real quick. We finished with this purl stitch, so I'm just gonna weave it into this first knit stitch right here. You can really do this however you like, but I usually just try and find that first full stitch. And then we'll go back in where we came out of. I'll weave in that end later, but that kind of creates a cleaner finish right there. And that is it. As you can see, like it creates a very nice stretchy finish. Okay, and now we're ready to pick up the stitches that we left on hold for our sleeves. I'm going to use the same 4mm needles that I used to knit the neck section. I'm going to just go ahead and pick up those stitches we left to rest on this first sleeve. Okay, I just picked up those last 2 stitches that we left on hold. So we can now remove that scrap yarn that we were using. And because we cast on 4 stitches here, we're going to also need to pick up 4 stitches. I also like to do something on either side here because sometimes I have some gaping. Before we go on ahead and pick up our 4 stitches, you can see that there's these 2 legs, 1, 2, on either side of this stitch right here. And we're going to pick up here and here. These 2 stitches aren't going to count towards our total stitch count. We're going to decrease in the next round. So we're going to go back to front through that first leg like this, and then front to back through the next one. So you should kind of have that stitch. It almost looks like a double stitch actually, but you should have it on your needles just like this. Okay, we now can go ahead and pick up our 4 stitches and attach the yarn to our work. So I'm going to go in to this first stitch here like this, and then take our yarn and loop it around and hold it tight with this hand here, And then we've picked up one stitch. And now we're going to go into this next one here, insert our needle again, loop our working yarn around, and pick up a second stitch. And now we're going to place our beginning of round marker again on the needle, and then pick up our last two stitches. So again, go into the next stitch, pick one up, and then into this last one right here. Pick one up. And now you can see the legs are much more pronounced on this side, and this is exactly what would create a big gap in between. So again, we have this stitch with one leg, two legs running through, and we're gonna take our right needle and insert it from back to front through that first leg, and then front to back through the second one. And again, these two do not count towards our total stitch count. But we're now going to go ahead and knit all the way around until one stitch before those two legs that we picked up. All right, and we reached one stitch before those two legs. Since these two don't count towards our total stitch count, we need to decrease by 2. So to do that, we're going to knit these two together and create a left leaning decrease, and then knit these two together and create a right leaning decrease. So to do that, we're going to slip this first one knitwise and then place it back on the needle, and then we're going to knit these two through the back loop, which is a little bit fiddly because you don't want to pick up that actual stitch, you just want to pick up that leg. So make sure you pick up like this and then knit. There we go. And then these two you can knit two together like this. And now that should help with any potential gaps. And we can knit until 1, and that's the end of the round. So we're going to do one more round of knits so we can handle those two other legs that we picked up on this side. And we're going to handle them in the exact same way that we handled the first ones. We're going to knit 1 and then create our left leaning decrease by initially slipping that stitch knitwise, placing it back on our needles, and then knitting those 2 stitches through the back loop like this. And then for the next 2, we're going to knit those 2 together. And we have decreased by 2. And hopefully closed up any potential gaps in that sleeve. So you can now knit normally until the end of the round. Okay, and I'm just reaching the end of that round now. And now we're going to work in 1x1 ribbing to create our cuff, just like we did for the back section and for the neck section. So I'm going to do a knit 1 first, followed by a purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, all the way around. And you can keep doing this for as long or as short as you'd like to. It depends on how big of a cuff you want your dog sweater to have. I am only going to do 3 rounds total because Mac has very short legs. I'll see you guys once I've finished the cuff. I'm now finishing my teeny tiny cuff for Mac. Once your cuff reaches your desired length, we can go ahead and bind off. I'm gonna again use Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. We're going to work a reverse yarn over like we did previously. And then we're going to knit 1 and then bind off 1 using that yarn over. And now it's a purl stitch, so we're going to yarn over regularly like this. And we're going to purl 1, and then we can bind off 2 this time. And we're just going to keep doing that until we reach the end of the round. We're just binding off that final stitch, and maybe we can wrap it one more time. And that's it. We can go ahead and cut the tail And just like the back section, I'm gonna weave in that tail just to make a bit of a cleaner edge. So I can see it right here. And this is that final purl stitch we worked. So I'm gonna go into this final knit stitch, which is right here. We can go back, right back in there. And then, yeah, creates a nice even edge. But that is it. That is the sleeve. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do the exact same thing on this side here. And once we finished, I'll weave in my ends, give this a block, and I will show you guys the final product. And this is the finished product, guys. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Blocking definitely helped smooth everything out very nicely, and it fits Mac great. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section below, or feel free to message me on Ravelry as well. I do check that pretty often. All right, thanks so much, guys, and I hope you have a great day.